the Unholy Death Knight. Bow. It's still a pretty fun spec, but they did go through and change the talents a bit and reduce the actual runic power generation. It's more of a core rotation, a little more pace than what you would normally end up seeing, but it's still a fun spec all in all. You've got your diseases, your plagues, and an ungodly amount of AoE to end up tossing in on this, depending on how you end up playing. So with this, let's take a real solid look at where you want to be with this spec, starting off with the abilities. So here we are taking a look at the abilities, and the very first thing up here is going to be Anti-Magic Shell. It's instant, it's a 1 minute cooldown. It doesn't work a whole hell of a lot different than what's on live, but it's going to absorb up to a decent amount of magic damage and preventing applications of harmful magic effects. Damage absorbed also generates runic power now. Your artifact ability is going to be Apocalypse. This thing's actually pretty damn awesome. Basically, what it's going to do is it's going to do a strike that deals minimal physical damage, but it bursts all the festering wounds on the target, doing some solid damage. And then it also summons a member of your army of the dead for 15 seconds for each burst of festering wound. So we'll go ahead and just give you a general on this. Let me get zoomed out just a bit. Now what we're going to do is we'll just quickly apply a couple stacks. There we are. We're at 8. That is actually the cap of how many you can end up having. And then here it goes. Here goes Apocalypse. Boom. Hit him. All those things burst. And now we've got all these Army of the Dead coming out to fight. This is going to be it's a very solid cooldown on a 1.5 minute CD. Unfortunately, the Army of the Deads don't really do a hell of a lot of damage, and they don't last very long, but they are there. And then you still have your normal Army of the Dead, so you can still end up summoning these guys out, and they're going to do the same damn thing as they always do. Now, what the tooltip ends up saying, it is still a 10-minute cooldown. It costs three runes, and it also, it's going to summon all these guys. There it is. They just basically go nuts, do their whole damage, and that's going to be all there is to it. Generalized CD, Fire and Forget, 3 runes, 10-minute cooldown, but they do a decent amount of damage. Chains of Ice shackles the target with frozen chains, reducing movement speed by 70% for 8 seconds, and that's all it's going to do. It's just going to hold him in place and then slow him down. Not a whole hell of a lot going on, but that does cost 1 rune, 30-yard range. Control Undead dominates the target undead creature up to level 103, which is usually always 1 level higher than what you are, forcing it to do your bidding for 5 minutes. Dark Command. This is just a generalized taunt. If you need to end up, for some reason, pulling something off of the tank that doesn't need to be there, you've got a chance of actually doing this by taunting it. Instant, 8-second cooldown, and it's just going to automatically pull the target to you. Dark Transformation. This is one of your key gameplay items, and basically this is going to transform your A-Bomb or your Ghoul, depending on the way you talent. But we'll go ahead and summon them real quick. It's kind of weird. They've got an animation glitch going on. The A-Bomb will show up in just a second here. And then I've got the Skulker also, just due to the talent. Just give him a second. He'll show up, I think. Maybe. Let's try casting it again. Here comes another Skulker. Hey, there he is. Found him. So here this is, and this is the A-Bomb. And again, this is due to a talent. Normally it would be your normal Ghoul that you're used to seeing. He does have a couple neat abilities. Protective Bile, which is going to end up reducing all damage it takes by 50%, and then there's just there's Hook also, wherever it's at. There it is. Hurl a Hook, pulling the target. It's basically got its own little death coil, or not death coil, but death grip. So there's that. But basically what Dark Transformation is going to do is it's actually going to change the A-Bomb into that big boy, and he's going to just basically attack your main target and do a really high amount of damage. He not only has that general ability, but he also has a smash ability, which deals light damage and also stuns everything in place. Really nice to end up seeing the little bit of changes on there. So, again, that's just the general. We'll go ahead and back off real quick. Death and Decay is still here. You still have Death and Decay, and the nice part about Death and Decay is it not only plays out as an AoE here, but it also plays out to where Scourge Strike will hit everything. So as you end up hitting your main spamming ability, it's going to hit all targets around. But just so you know, it's going to do a decent amount of shadow damage over 10 seconds to targets within the area. While you remain within the area, your Scourge Strike will hit all enemies near the target. Costs 1 rune, it is an instant cast, and it's a 30-second cooldown. Death Coil, 35 runic power, fires a blast of unholy energy at the target, causing fairly low shadow damage to an enemy and restoring 10 energy to your abomination. This is going to be your main use on runic power in your core rotation. Let me back up real quick. So the main thing you're looking at doing is this is not only got to play for you, but it's also got to play towards your pet. And if you keep this thing on a general rotation where you're using it like once every other spell or every third spell, you should be alright as long as you have the runic generation to keep up with it. And this also has another play we'll go into in a second. Deathgate is still here, but it works a little differently. It's still going to return you to the Ebon Hole, but it's your class order hall now. So basically you'll end up using this and it'll take you to your class order hall. You can use it again and it'll take you to the a close spot from where you actually left. So you have a quick way of getting back out to where you were questing at. Real nice to end up seeing that because not a lot of classes have that ability anymore. Death Grip's still there. Instant, 25-second cooldown. Basically you're just going to pull the target to you. That's all it's going to do. Death Strike, 40 runic power. They kind of put the tanking mechanic in this to where it heals you for 20% of all the damage taken in the last 5 seconds, minimum of 7% of maximum health. I don't know if that's the way it's been on live or not, but one thing I will say is it does end up helping quite a bit, especially since you still have Dark Secure, and we'll go over that once we get to the passives. But it's a good solid 40 runic power. It deals very moderate physical damage, but it's a good heal for survivability. Festering Strikes, sorry about the cutoff up top there, but Festering Strikes, it's 2 runes, and it deals a good amount of physical damage and infects the target with 2 to 4 Festering Wounds. Now, this is going to be one of your main gameplay items. What it's going to do is, Festering Wounds are one of your diseases, and when damaged by Scourge Strike, they'll explode. They deal some good amount of shadow damage and generate 3 runic power. So this is how you're kind of doing your wax and wane of how you want to build these things up. You'll basically want to use Festering Strike and then Scourge Strike. We'll go over it real quick. It's an Unholy Strike that deals decent physical damage and shadow damage and causes 1 Festering Burst. Not a whole hell of a lot that really goes on with this ability, except for the fact that it's part of your core rotation, and you're going to want to end up using Festering Strike anytime before you use Scourge Strike until you end up running out of Festering Wounds, and then you're going to want to build back up. So 2 runes, 1 rune. It does seem like you're a little bit more starved compared to what it was on Alpha, but there's a good gameplay mix between these, and you'll end up definitely seeing some solid gameplay out of this spec. Icebound Fortitude, 3-minute cooldown. Your blood freezes, granting immunity to stun effects and reducing all damage you take by 20% for 8 seconds. Just a general defensive, works pretty decent. Mind Freeze, still your interrupt. Outbreak, something completely new. Basically what this is going to do is you're going to use this ability, and any target around the target that you apply this to over the next 6 seconds is going to get infected with Virulent Plague. Virulent Plague is a disease that does a pretty solid amount of damage over 21 seconds. Now, its normal dot damage, not so much, but it does have a chance to end up erupting and dealing a decent amount of shadow damage, but it's divided in all nearby enemies. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but it's got a 30 chance to erupt each time it ticks or if the target dies. That being said, the more targets this is on, the more chances it's going to erupt, and even though the damage is divided, it's just going to non-stop blow up everywhere. It does great in both single target and AoE situations, even with the division of the damage. Path of Frost works the same as what's on live. It's going to allow you and your party members to end up walking on water. Raise Ally. This is your 10-minute battle res. You still got this. It's going to bring someone back from the dead for 60% health and 20% mana. Raise Dead. This is just how you bring your ghoul back. Now you'll notice there's no cooldown on this, and it's due to a talent. Normally, let me pull it up real fast. We'll swap this over. Alright, so now that they're gone, so Raise Dead's normally going to be on a 1 minute cooldown if you do not have All Will Serve, and we're going to stick with All Will Serve just because it's a lot of additional damage going that way. Rune Forging, it's still here. Your general rune that you're going to use, though, is going to be Rune of the Fallen Crusader. There's only the 3 in here still. Razor Ice, that's going to be for Frost. This is going to be your general Unholy rune, and maybe Offhand in Frost, depending on how you want to play this. And then Rune of Stoneskin Gargoyle is going to be for tanking, for blood. Now, what you're looking at is this has got a chance to end up healing you for 6% and increase your total strength by 25% for 15 seconds. This is just a basic deal. Once you throw this on, you'll never have to think about it again because you have the same weapon the whole damn time. Scourge Strike, we already went over that. Decent damaging ability, and its main purpose is to pop off the festering wounds that Festering Strike is actually putting up. Soul Reaper's a talent. Great gameplay out of this, but we will go over it a little bit later. Summon Gargoyle. It's still a Fire and Forget 3 minute cooldown. A Gargoyle flies down and just bombards the area, as you can see. Here he is, and we'll give him something to attack. And then he's just going to end up pelting away at the different targets. Now, the extra damage you're seeing is actually going to be from the eruptions of Virulent Plague. Wraithwalk, they did give you some movement, but it is on a pretty long cooldown. You're looking at a 1 minute cooldown. It's just going to increase your speed by 70% for 3 seconds. During this time, nothing can end up slowing you down. You're moving as quick as possible, or up to that 70% additional movement speed. But if you try and attack anything during that, you will cancel the effect. Dark Secure, or Succor, whatever. Passive. When you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor, your next death strike within 20 seconds is free and its healing is increased by 100%. This is great for questing, chain pulling. As long as you keep going, you'll always have one of these death strikes that's available to just pop you up and almost acts like Victory Rush in a warrior. Plays out very nice and keeps you going. Death's Advance increases movement speed by 15%, so you always have a 15% movement speed increase. That's great to end up seeing. Mastery Dreadblade increases all shadow damage done by 43%. Just a basic damage increase. Nothing too special going on, but it does end up playing very solidly into the spec, as where almost everything you do is going to be considered shadow damage. On a Pale Horse, you're as hard to stop as death itself. Basically, the only thing this does is increase your mounted speed by 20%. Runic Corruption, you have a 1.25 chance per runic power you spend to increase your rune regeneration rate by 100% for 3 seconds. This is what I was talking about by wanting to end up making sure you never end up capping, why you want to spend it on Death Coil, because as you end up spending your runic power, you're going to have a chance of increasing your rune regeneration. Now it says 100% for 3 seconds. Basically what this is going to end up doing is just giving you 3 runes over 3 seconds. Pretty solid. I mean, it's really solid on how quick this ends up playing out. It's real quick. You want to make sure you're always kind of keeping a good wax and wane. And the nice part about this spec is you're not just looking at, like in comparison to Frost, to where it's just basically going through 3-button rotation. No, it's nothing like that at all. It's a lot more complex. You're not only looking at managing your runes and your runic power, but you're looking at managing your runes, your runic power, your dots, between Festering Strike and everything. You're looking at managing your pet's energy. There's a lot of micromanaging to this spec, and it makes it pretty damn fun. There's a lot going on. Now with that, let's take a look at Sudden Doom. Your auto attacks have a chance to make your next Death Coil cost no runic power. Now this is great, except without the use of runic power. And I'm not sure if this is right or not, but with this thing being free, you're not using that runic power, so you don't have a chance of proccing Runic Corruption. So it almost feels like this one's working against itself. I didn't ever notice it actually proc off of a Death Coil, off of a Sudden Doom Death Coil, so I'm not sure if it has a chance still. But this Runic Corruption here, it really, without spending the runes, it kind of sucks, but it does give you a little bit of free damage, and it also gives your pet a little bit of free energy. Not too bad. Now with this, guys, let's go ahead and move on to the talents. Alright, taking a look at the talents. This is generally what I was running with. There are a couple really interesting different pieces going back and forth in this, so I'm not sure exactly what's going to be best, but we will definitely talk over all of them. All will serve. Passive. Your Raised Dead spell summons an additional skeletal minion and its cooldown is removed. Now, I did end up showing this a bit in the abilities, but this is going to be your Risen Skulker, and he hits extremely damn hard in both single target and AoE. He does a multi-shot, and he also ends up doing a single target shot, and he just hits very, very hard, and he just goes back and forth between the single shot and the multi-shot, and it's probably still needing tuning, to be quite honest, but this guy does a ton of damage. Now, we'll go on to Bursting Sores. Passive, Festering Wounds deals 50% more damage when burst, and all enemies within 8 yards of burst Festering Wounds suffer. This is going to give you a little bit more damage off of your Festering Wounds play if you want to go more that direction. And it also gives it some AoE benefit. Now, the 7,092 shadow damage is what it does normally baseline when they blow up. So what you're looking at is the baseline damage is still going to hit everything else, and then the single person that you're actually bursting the wound on is going to do a little bit of extra. Ebon Fever, Virulent Plague deals the same damage in half the time. This just means you're reapplying Virulent Plague more often and you're getting more disease damage. Now, the other part that you're looking at with this is it's going to increase the ticks, so it's also going to increase the erupt damage. It's not just the disease itself, but you do have a better chance of getting all that extra erupt damage, which really shows up well. 57, Epidemic, 1 rune, instant. It does have an 8.98 second recharge because it has, I believe, 2 stacks. And it causes each of your Virulent Plagues within 100 yards. The flare-up dealing 18,341 shadow damage to the infected enemy, and an additional 3,000 to all other enemies. So this is just a burst AoE. The main thing that I can kind of put this in perspective with is Arcane has Supernova and all those style abilities to where they do more damage to the target that you're on, and then kind of do a minimal amount of damage off to each side. That's basically the way Epidemic plays out. Pestilent Pustules. Every 5th Festering Wound you burst grants you 1 rune. This is just great on keeping you in line and actually giving you some momentum for the fights. Plays out pretty well. Blighted Rune Weapon. Instant 1 minute cooldown. Your next 4 auto attacks infect your target with 2 Festering Wounds. You don't really have a problem keeping Festering Wounds up in a single target situation. AoE sometimes a little bit more because you do have extra abilities you gotta end up using, and they're all costing runes. But in a single target situation, there really isn't too much of an issue keeping Festering Wounds up. Unholy Frenzy, passive. When a Festering Wound bursts, you gain 100% increased attack speed for 2 seconds. This is pretty solid also. It helps with runic power regeneration because each time you end up hitting with your melee weapon, it does build some runic power. But it's not a whole hell of a lot, and then you just basically get a little double tap in there, and yeah, it's okay. I mean, it wasn't the greatest for a passive. And then you got Castigator. Each Festering Strike, critical strike, applies 2 additional Festering Wounds. Each Scourge Strike, critical strike, bursts 1 additional Festering Wound. So this was just additional damage building and additional damage done all in all, as long as you had the crit to support it. Clawing Shadows. This one actually plays out very well, and it also is all shadow damage instead of physical and shadow damage, so it's directly affected by your mastery. It replaces Scourge Strike. It's 1 rune, and it basically acts the same as what Scourge Strike was, but instead of having the physical and the shadow and then the Festering Wound Burst, it's just shadow damage and the Festering Wound Burst. And again, this is directly modified by your mastery. Level 60, the Sludge Belcher, passive. Raised Dead now summons an abomination instead of a ghoul with improved innate abilities. Asphyxiate, instant, 45-second cooldown, lifts the enemy target off the ground, crushing their throat with dark energy and stunning them for 5 seconds. We've seen this before. It's just a general CC, and it works out pretty well. Debilitating Infestation. Outbreak reduces the movement speed of all affected enemies by 50% for 3 seconds. Again, I mean, if you're looking at slowing something down, this is going to be a great way of doing it. Level 75, Spell Eater. Passive, your anti-magic shell is 20% larger and lasts 5 seconds longer. It just felt like a good addition to the CC already. Corpse Shield, instant, 1 minute cooldown. For the next 10 seconds, 90% of all damage you take is transferred to your abomination. If your abomination is slain while this spell is active, it cannot be resummoned for 30 seconds. This was a dangerous gameplay. If you ended up taking a large enough hit, this was very dangerous to where you wouldn't have your pet back up, and it was no bueno. I mean, your pet does a lot of your damage. It really does. And this was kind of a wax and wane. You know, more wane than wax, really. So I stuck away from this one, and just because the transfer, your pet doesn't have a whole hell of a lot of health to begin with. You're looking at almost 200k. You're sitting at almost 500k. It doesn't take a lot for that to end up killing this guy off. Lingering Apparition. Passive, you move 30% faster while Wraith Walk, and its cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds. Really, it's just 100% movement speed. You move at mount speed for 3 seconds instead of 70%, and it's got a reduced cooldown, so it takes it down from 60 seconds to 45. Not a whole lot going out of that unless you really need that additional movement. 90, Shadow Infusion. Passive, while your abomination is not transformed, Death Coil will also reduce the remaining cooldown of Dark Transformation by 5 seconds. Now, this was the other thing I wanted to get to about Death Coil. Death Coil is great. They did kind of change this a bit because it was, even while he was transformed, it was cooling it down. And it seemed like it was doing it a little too fast, or it was always off. You know, you basically only had like 10 seconds of downtime on Dark Transformation. Not a whole lot of change. It basically took it from being 10 seconds of downtime off of this to about 30. That's just the general. And it still plays very well. So you're looking at level 90, Necrosis. Passive, dealing damage with Death Coil causes your next Scourge Strike to deal 25% increased damage. If you want to end up playing that route to where you're having to Death Coil and then Scourge Strike, this is going to be a pretty solid amount of additional damage, but I don't think it's going to be as much as getting your A-Bomb off cooldown as quick as what it is. This fits well into the rotation, as to where Shadow Infusion, it's a kind of a fire and forget. You know, you'll see it come off cooldown, you'll hit it, and then once it's off, it's something completely passive. This adds a gameplay choice to where you're ending up going to Death Coil and Scourge Strike. You're going to want to make sure you got Festering Wounds. It's got a little bit of a gameplay choice, but I still don't see it as well because the A-Bomb does hit very hard. Infected Claws. Passive, your Abomination's Cleaver attack has a 35% chance to cause a Festering Wound on the target. Again, not a whole hell of a lot of problems with keeping Festering Wounds up. Dark Arbiter replaces Summon Gargoyle. Summons a Valkyrie to attack the target for 15 seconds. The Valkyrie will gain 1% damage every 1 runic power you spend. This kind of makes for an interesting gameplay. Now, what you're looking at is you're wanting to pool up as much runic power as possible, and then you're going to want to call down the Valkyrie and just basically go ham on spending runic power at this point, because that's going to burst its damage. It kind of gives some interaction with Summon Gargoyle, because it does basically the same thing. It just comes down and does a random cast, or not random, but casts at the target. But it does have a way of ramping its damage, and you have a way of turning this into something that's actually got some gameplay effect. I wish this was more baseline than anything, but instead of firing and forgetting your Gargoyle, this gives you something to look forward to when you use that cooldown, and gives it a little bit more timing structure. Defile is still here. Replaces Death and Decay. It's 1 rune, 30-second cooldown. Defile the ground targeted by the Death Knife for 10 seconds. Every 1 second, if there are any enemies standing in the defile, it deals Shadow Frost damage to them and grows in radius, and increases your mastery by 65, stacking up to 10 times. While you remain within the defile, your Scourge Strike will hit all enemies near the target. Now, what I have to say about this is there's not a whole hell of a lot of difference on here, but the thing is, you're looking at this only lasts 10 seconds. So, in retrospect, you're looking at 65 mastery, going up to 650, and then it's gone. That's it. it's not that great. It doesn't do a lot of damage, and it's really there. Where this would actually take off is if you took Defile and you ended up going with Clawing Shadows. Because again, like I said, this is directly tied into your mastery because it's all shadow damage. So you'd end up taking Defile and Clawing Shadows, and you would just absolutely dominate anything that was in this area with the extra damage that you would get from Clawing Shadows, or aka Scourge Strike, just because of the mastery gain. That is what you're looking at, and it's a 30-second burst AoE window. Well, it's not even really burst, it's just progressively bursting, I guess. I don't know how to end up really explaining it, except you can see you're going to end up getting up some pretty solid mastery. And that's, again, if you took Clawing Shadows, that's going to be the best way to go in an AoE situation. Then you have Soul Reaper. It's 1 rune, 45-second cooldown, and this has some really awesome gameplay in it. Basically, what you can end up doing is, you're going to hit this thing. One, it hits pretty damn hard. It costs 1 rune. But you're bursting a Festering Wound on an enemy afflicted by Soul Reaper grants 7% haste for 15 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. So you can get 21% additional haste. This helps out a ton in rune generation. Now we'll go ahead and just show it real quick. We'll stack it up. We'll let it prep up so we can get this stuff taken care of, because you do have a kind of a build-up window for this. Now, we'll go ahead and Soul Reaper. There's that, and we'll pop off 1, 2, 3. Alright, and as you can see, I now have the buff. Haste increased by 21. And you just start swinging like a madman. You build up a lot of generation, and then your runes are just non-stop flying off the handle. It's almost done anyways, but you can see how quick that they're regenning because of the haste, and it's now over, so it's slowed down. Really enjoyable piece. It lasts a very short window, but if you end up using this just after some rune generation, you'll end up getting this to where it pops off very well, and it plays out extremely nicely. Now, I don't have a whole hell of a lot extra to end up saying on this. You dirty bastard, get out of here. The Skulker never stops damage. That's the only major bad part. Anyways, Soul Reaper has a good gameplay situation with it. And again, you've got this to where it's on a shorter, for more long-term fights, I guess. And then you've got Dark Arbiter, which also plays very well in a single target situation as long as you're pooling up. Basically, this is going to be for pooling runic power. And this is going to be for pooling up some, well, basically you're going to be pooling Festering Wounds. And then you're also going to have at least 3 runes himself up. So Festering Wounds, 3 runes, and you'll be able to get some pretty solid damage out of this ability thanks to the haste. So with this, guys, let's go ahead and take a look at the artifact itself. Apocalypse is the name of the game, and that's also the name of the sword. Really, this thing is an interesting piece. As you can see, it's a little big for the area that we have here, so it does clip a bit. But it's a nice looking sword, and this is going to be your general basic model. Now we'll let it spin a bit, but as you can see, there are different color choices. There's blue, there's purple, there's red. And if you saw the face on the front, it's basically the same thing, but we will let it spin so you can get a better look. Here we go. And there you have it. Pretty solid looking model. And then Unholy War is the next, and this thing is pretty damn solid also. Pretty decent. You can see where it splits off on the sides. Let it spin a little. See the back half in red. It's a good looking weapon. I mean, it's big, it's bulky, it's just what everybody wants in a sword. You've got like the little cross handle down here, which is pretty interesting, and then just the color schemes themselves. A very enjoyable blade. Let's let it spin around so you can get another look. Here it comes, and there you go. Not bad at all. I wish this wasn't clipping up top. And then you got Herald of Pestilence. This is another sick one. Extremely, it looks painful, honestly. It just looks really painful. If you got hit by this thing, it would hurt. In fact, if you got hit by any of them, they probably hurt. But still, what you also see, the pestilence itself is actually the flies flying around this thing. They did a real good job with the animations. Interesting gameplay. Or not gameplay, but interesting choices for their models. There you go. You can actually see it from here, the big old hook on the end. And then we'll look at the like bluish green. And then the yellow. And then Famine Bear is going to be your PvP. This is a different model, but I mean, it still looks pretty cool. I could see this thing being swung around in PvP, looking pretty solid. Let it spin. Hopefully we can get a better look. And I do apologize for this, but this thing needs to actually be dropped down to about here. But it is beta, guys, so we are still looking at some things that need to be fixed. And here it comes. Get one more good look. That's going to be it. Just your different color models. Alright guys, so with this, let's go straight into the traits. Here we are taking a look at the traits. And again, we had mentioned Apocalypse in the actual abilities, kind of gave a demonstration. What it is a 1.5 minute cooldown. It's going to hit the enemy dealing minimal physical damage. I mean, it's not bad. And then bursts all the festering wounds on the target, doing additional shadow damage. And then for each one that it bursts, it's summoning an army of the dead. So you can have anywhere between 1 and 8. More than likely, you're going to go for that 8 mark on such a heavy cooldown to make sure you get the best out of the damage. That would just be my guess, but some people may not. So here you are. That's going to just be the basic of Apocalypse. 8 festering wounds, pop this bad boy, do lots of damage. Feast of Souls. Very first thing you get when you walk out, and it's going to automatically increase shadow damage you deal by 8%. This is great because it affects almost every ability. Then we're looking at Rotten Touch. Rank 03 increases damage dealt by Festering Strike by 5, 10, or 15%. It's just a great damage topper on top of what you're already doing. Now, Festering Strike is the one that applies Festering Wounds. It doesn't hit very hard on its own, but this is going to help improve that problem. Runic Tattoos. Rank 03 increases your maximum runic power by 5 and your runic power generation by 3. Now this is going to more than likely turn into 5, 10, and 15, and 3, 6, and 10%. Scourge of the Worlds. Rank 0 of 1. Death Coil has a chance to increase your Scourge Strike damage against that target by 50% for 6 seconds. Scourge Strike is your harder hitting ability as long as Festering Wounds are on, and I'm not sure if this is going to just do Scourge Strike's damage itself, but if you did swap Scourge Strike out for Clawing Shadows, it's going to end up replacing Scourge Strike in this ability, and Mastery is going to just make that thing destroy. Pretty solid damage increase. It's just going to be a timed ability to where you want to make sure you have a couple additional runes so you can actually slap Scourge Strike, and you want to have it prepped up. And again, there's a lot of preparation in this spec to actually do damage. It's not mindless by any means. You've got a lot of thinking involved with this spec. The next one's the Darkest Crusade, rank 03, increases the effect of your Fallen Crusader rune by 7%. Now 7, 14, 21% is more than likely the way it's going to end up going. This is extremely good, and like I said, Fallen Crusader is going to be the rune of your choice. So what it's looking at, normally it's 25% or 20% increase to strength. I can't remember which one it is. This is talking about the effect there. So you're looking at the additional strength benefit that you'll end up getting. So this is going to be 7, 14, or 21 additional strength percent off of that. Huge amounts of damage during that proc. Portal to the Underworld. Your army of the dead ghouls explode when they die, dealing 13,000 shadow damage to nearby enemies. Yeah, this may work. I think this works with the Apocalypse ones also, but this is just a little bit of AoE on top of whatever they're doing, and it's also going to be pretty solid for single target if that's the case, because that's not a shy amount. If you've got 8 ghouls that are doing 13,000 apiece, and again, I'm not even max level, this is more than likely going to be much higher, But still, that's going to be, what, like 100,000 additional damage when they finally blow up out of 8 of them. So, if that is off of the Apocalypse Army of the Dead Ghouls also, which it's the same spell, technically, I think it should end up working that way, that's going to be a lot of additional damage. Eternal Agony. Increase the duration of Dark Transformation by 2, 4, or 6 seconds. Scourge of the Unbeliever. Scourge Strike has a 3% chance to generate 1, 2, or 3 runes. That's, Scourge Strike is probably going to have a 3, 6, or 10% chance to generate 1 rune. That's more than likely the way it's going to go. Unholy Endurance, rank 0-3. Reduce all damage you take from area effect attacks by 5, 10, or 15%. Survivability, that's always decent. The Shambler, your attacks have a chance to summon a super zombie that shambles forward and explodes, dealing 13,000 shadow damage to nearby enemies. AoE, I mean, that's about it. It's kind of funny, the Shambler thing, because I think this is probably going to be like, if you went and did the Plants vs. Zombies stuff, that's probably going to be kind of the same model, which will be interesting. Deadliest Coil, increased death coil by 5, 10, or 15%. Gravitational Pull, rank 0-1. Death Grip also reduces its target's movement speed by 50% for 6 seconds. Okay. Deadly Durability, rank 0-3. Increases the effectiveness of Anti-Magic Shell and Icebound Fortitude by 3%. And that's going to be more than likely 3, 6, and 10%. Double Doom, rank 0-1. Sudden Doom can now accumulate 2 charges and will occur 15% more frequently. More death coils. More death coils. That's all I can say. Death coil, death coil, death coil. Plague Bearer, rank 0-3. Increases damage dealt by Virulent Plague by 5, 10, or 15%. Just an overall damage increase. I'm not sure if this is going to also affect the erupts, or if it's just the baseline dot. Haven't gotten to it yet to test it. But again, that's something to end up thinking about later on. It may be just the dot, or it may be the dot and the eruption. I would think if it's doing Virulent Plague, the eruptions are part of its damage also. And then Armies of the Damned. Ghouls summoned by Army of the Dead apply additional effects with their claws. Death, increased damage taken from the Death Knight. War, reduced healing done. Famine, reduced damage dealt to the Death Knight. Pestilence, additional damage over time. So, basically, this is going to have different abilities off of the cooldowns, as long as, and I'm not sure if it's RNG or if it's just going to all apply on there, because each one's going to do something different. And again, I believe the ghouls, it's saying the ghouls summoned by Army of the Dead, so that's going to be based just off of your 10-minute cooldown. With this, guys, what we're looking at is a fire artifact, a shadow artifact, and a blood artifact. But now that this is over, let's go ahead and talk about what everybody likes to see, and that's the gameplay. The Unholy Death Knight, and man, is this thing pretty solid in both single target and AoE, with a lot of stuff to end up tracking. There is so much to do in this spec. It is great. Now, first off, we're going to talk about the AoE, because it's the simpler of the two. Generally, on the AoE situation, all you're looking at doing really is tossing out Outbreak, then you're going to drop your Death and Decay or Defile, depending on what you ended up taking, and then you're going to slam the shit out of Scourge Strike. This is going to be your basic AoE ability. As for Outbreak, is going to put Virulent Plague on everything, which is going to cause eruptions and do damage over time. Really awesome ability there. And then whenever you drop Death and Decay is going to do its normal shadow damage that you're used to, but it's going to make it so your Scourge Strike will hit all enemies near the target. So you're going to drop down your Scourge, or your Death and Decay, and slam the hell out of your Scourge Strike, because that thing is just going to hit everything around you. Now, if you need to end up prioritizing, or if you got a little bit of ramp time, you can throw up a couple Festering Wounds on the target and do some more single target damage to that one. But if you're going straight in and you're just going balls to the wall AoE, that's going to be the general of what you're looking at, is just Virulent Plague, Death and Decay, Scourge Strike, Scourge Strike, Scourge Strike, and go from there. That's just the basis. That's as easy as it gets. and it does a hell of a lot of damage. Now, there are a few ways to improve your AoE damage through talents. I'm not going to go into them too much, but you have ways of making your festering wounds explode and do damage to everything around, and so on and so forth, increasing your virulent plague eruption time, a whole lot of different ways that you can end up improving this, going 2 different directions. Talents are pretty obvious. So, with that, let's talk about single target, where the magic actually ends up starting to happen. Now, in a boss fight situation, you're going to end up taking off, and depending on what you ended up talenting, for me, it was just straight out the box. You saw the talents that I had. Where we're going with this is, first things first, I always just pop my Summon Gargoyle and let it do its thing right off the bat. Army of the Dead if it was off cooldown, just because they're fire and forgets. That's the whole problem with those abilities. But you do have a way of making your Gargoyle to where it's got some key effort to it, depending on how you want to spec. So with this, we're going to actually end up, okay, Summon Gargoyle, Army of the Dead, fire those off, get them out of the way. The next thing that I'd end up doing is Dark Transformation, right off the bat. Because your Ghoul does a lot of additional damage, and it just helps out. Then I would build up to 8 Festering Wounds using Festering Strike, pop off Apocalypse, get that additional huge damage out of that thing, and then also end up getting all those Army of the Dead out there doing their abilities. And then you'd be going more than likely into Death Coil or something, because you're going to be pretty high on Runic Power at this point. And the next thing you're going to end up doing, start rebuilding Festering Strikes. Build up to about 5 or 6, and then you'll start using Scourge Strike to slowly build them, use them off. Or what you can end up doing is building up those Festering Wounds. You're going to want to build those Festering Wounds up, and then if you took it, pop Soul Reaper, blow off at least 3 during that short 15-second window, and it's going to definitely increase your haste. Or, I'm sorry, during that 5-second window, it'll increase your haste for 15 seconds. Really solid amount of extra damage comes out of this, and rune generation, to where you get a good spammy time. Now, the main thing you're wanting to look at, that's just going to be like a general opener. There's going to be a lot of different things that play into the spec. You're going to be watching your pet's energy bar and your runic power. A lot of the times, whenever you get up there in runic power and you start getting into a general rotation after that initial start, you're just looking at playing Festering Strike, making sure that you keep up enough wounds, and then you're going to use Scourge Strike to burn them off while tossing in Death Coils. So basically you're going to look at a Festering Strike, possibly 2 Scourge Strikes, Death Coil, Festering Strike, 2 Scourge Strikes, so on and so forth. I mean, you've got to end up monitoring it. There is no one way to actually say this is going to go, because it does have a huge dynamic on its gameplay. You have your pet, you have how many Festering Wounds you have up, you have how much runic power you have how many runes you have. There's a whole huge dynamic in the gameplay of this, and it plays out extremely well, and it's extremely fun on how well this thing actually plays. With the different talents, you can end up either making this a little bit more simple or a little bit harder, depending on how you want to play. Now, the harder you do end up making it in a single target, it's pretty obvious the more damage you're going to do. That's just the general of how it goes, but you can make this fairly simple in other directions and still do a shit ton of damage. Positively, one of the most not energetic, I'm not going to use energetic, that's not the correct word, exciting. There is a lot of excitement in this spec as you start getting everything rolling and you realize, okay, what you've got to manage. There's just a hell of a lot to go on, and you are basically a melee warlock at this point, just constantly having to monitor everything. It's absolutely amazing, and it's not just apply your dots like it was before. You know, you did end up having your, I can't even think of the name of the dots, but your Frost Fever, and then the other one that you ended up, Blood Plague, I can't remember the name of it, but you did have those before on live. Now you've got Virulent Plague, which works completely different. It's just a basic dot, though, and you're managing it. Well, you're not really managing it, you're just watching a timer on it. Now, Festering Wound, on the other hand, it's random. Completely random. So there's no real way of monitoring this 100% except for actually paying attention to it, maybe making a weak aura on how many you have. But you're going to see these festering wounds, and with the way Festering Strike works, to where it can either put up 2 or 4, and then if you take the talent to where it can put 2 additional if you crit, and same thing with Scourge Strike, to where it can pop 1 additional one if you crit through that talent. You're looking at some very interesting gameplay, but some very high numbers in the process. And it just feels amazing. Absolutely amazing on how this thing plays. It's a little slow at first, I will admit. It is a little slow at first, but once you start getting used to the balance, it plays extremely well. And with this, guys, let's go ahead and take a look at the logs and see exactly where this thing was playing. Alright, so here we are taking a look at the logs, and as you can see, lots of huge damage, and you'll see this huge spike area, and most of this is going to be due to the fact that we had an AoE situation that came in. This is Fenrir in the Halls of Valor, and you'll see Death and Decay did get dropped, and we did a ton of AoE right through here, so that's why it took off really high in this area. Now, one thing I will end up saying is, I mentioned the Risen Skulker, alright, and he does Skulker Shot, which is a single target shot, and then he also does Arrow Spray, which is AoE, and you can see how much damage he ended up doing, because we did end up pulling a bunch of these dogs by accident on Fenrir. This is what you're looking at. So you've got the Skulker Shot, huge amounts of damage for this thing being a single target. It's ridiculous, and I don't think it's supposed to be that high, so there may be some tuning issues, but he hits extremely hard for just being a little skeletal minion. Then you've got your Violent or Virulent Eruption from your Virulent Plague. Now again, this is going to be caused by Outbreak, and the Virulent Plague itself, the dot does a decent amount of damage, but again, this was due to this whole AoE situation to where it went in. I wanted to kind of show a little bit of an AoE situation with this spec. Virulent Eruption, lots of eruptions, 62, average damage is 10,000. Really, it does a solid amount of damage all the way through and through. Arrow Spray, we already went over that. Festering Strike, this is going to be the one that actually applies your festering wounds. It doesn't hit very hard, but you do have to do some good applications. Scourge Strike, as you can see, 12 casts, 19 hits. Again, that's because of the AoE that we ran into. And then you've got Death Coil, starting to progressively go lower. Death and Decay, same thing. Total of 4 casts on that. Gargoyle Strike from the Gargoyle, just general damage. It doesn't do a whole hell of a lot. Soul Reaper hits pretty damn hard. 1 cast on it, 163,000 damage. I could have kept the uptime up higher on this, but I was still trying to learn Soul Reaper for myself. Again, there is a lot to end up doing to master this spec. Later on down the road, it got quite a bit better though. Melee from your Army of the Dead, which is going to be, this is just from, I don't believe I actually popped the Army of the Dead on this fight, but this is from the actual Army of the Dead from your Apocalypse that comes up. And then Apocalypse itself doesn't do a whole hell of a lot of damage in its actual physical ability. Where it gets all its damage and the burst it does is going to be from here. It's going to be from the Army of the Dead, but the main place is going to be the 8 festering wounds that it pops at once. So you got to think, on average 13,000. Again, 8 of those were going to be from whenever I popped Apocalypse. So again, this is just the general. Outbreak itself doesn't do a lot of damage. Now let's go ahead and take a look at, we'll look at God King Skovald. And again, here's what you're looking at. Skulker Shot. This is insane how much damage this little guy actually ends up doing. Festering Strike, way up there. This is all single target, mind you. Melee's pretty high. Festering Wounds are getting up there. Scourge Strike is getting up there. Scourge Strike, again, and I mean, I believe this is, I don't know. Oh, okay. Physical, and then you're looking at your shadow damage. That was a weird little breakdown there. But yeah, this is going to be the physical, the actual cast on it, and then the shadow damage that comes along. So you're looking at about 16%. So this is actually up above where Festering Strike is if they put this together. Some reason the logs are a little on the weird side with the way that they're playing this stuff out. Death Coil. Again, pretty solid amount of damage. Virulent Plague, Soul Reaper, 2 cast, 7.31% uptime, but the fight really didn't last too terribly long. The nice part about this was the additional haste. That's why melee is probably as high as what it is. Virulent Eruption, not a lot of damage, but again, the ticks on this are probably a bit slower. Outbreak, Apocalypse, again, not a lot of damage from it. Where you're looking at is going to be from Festering Wounds, and then also the your 2 guys down here. So, and then one last one, we'll go over Odin, which was the last boss in the Halls of Valor, and you'll see where the damage was pretty solid. And then where it actually took off was going to be when we did our change into the Valkyries. Scourge, or Skulker Shot, yet again. Absolutely insane amounts of damage out of this thing. Festering Strike, Festering Wounds, Melee. This is just a general, guys, of where you'll see your damage and how it's going to play out. But again, each one of these in purple, all these purples that you see are also going to be affected by your mastery because they are shadow damage. And as you end up getting more mastery, I'm going to say more crit also, this is going to just pop up real quick. So, with this, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you took a little bit of an education out of this, because they are somewhat for education, but mainly for the enjoyment. And as always, thanks for watching.